I have come a long way from when I first started quilting to now, but I honestly still feel like there's a lot I still need to learn. And some things that I know I need to be doing, I sometimes even forget to do or just don't think about it. Or I'll be like, it's okay if I don't do it this time, it'll be fine. So what I'm going to do today is share with you 10 tips that I've learned about quilting that have really helped me improve along the way. And the first thing I want to share with you has to do with contrast in your quilts. And even sometimes now I still make little mistakes, and I'll share with you a way that I kind of have learned to overcome that if I do still make that mistake. What I have found with quilts is that you really need a nice balance of not just color, but with the shade in the quilt. So you want some light, some medium, and some dark. And I have made so many quilts before where I just chose colors or prints, just fabrics that I really love, and try to put it into a quilt, and it kind of can get all muddled. So I really try to balance that. This quilt I feel like is a really good example of contrast because you can easily see it because it is all, the same color. It's all creams, grays, and black. So it's really easy to see that there is contrast in here. I find it gets a lot harder with colors because if you're using, say, blue, green, and orange, I don't know why you would use that in a quilt. Maybe it would work. But sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference if one is light and one is medium and one is dark because they're different colors and you're seeing the colors rather than the contrast. But with this quilt here, it's really easy to see it and it works so well. So a tip could be to take a picture of your fabrics that you want to use, put it to black and white, and that might let you see if you have enough contrast. Now with this quilt here, I want to show you something, and a lot of you loved this quilt when I made it for a tutorial video, and so I'm not knocking this quilt at all. I actually really love this quilt, but I want to point something out to you that I could have done to probably make the design stand out a little bit better. So with making this Argyle quilt, I chose the two blues and then the accent to make that beautiful Argyle pattern. Now, what I didn't notice was how much this dark blue and the black were going to kind of blend together in that design. So it didn't really pop the way I had envisioned it standing out. So if I had chose a more medium blue here, had a light, had a medium, and had a dark, I think this design would have popped even more than it does. So what I did to kind of try to help the design stand out more was I went with a lighter thread to quilt following the design for the Argyle pattern. And I think it really helped it stand out. It kind of gets lost through here, but it helps the pattern that I was wanting stand out a lot more. So let me know in the comments, when it comes to contrast, do you think about it a lot, or do you just pick fabrics that you really like and put them together in a quilt and hope it works? I'd love to hear from you. So tip number 2 is nesting seams. When I learned how to nest seams, it really changed quilting a lot for me. I finally was able to get my points to match up a lot nicer. My quilts laid a lot flatter and it was so much easier to quilt them. It was a real game changer for me. So what is nesting seams? So if you see these two patches here, I have the seam pressed toward the green fabric on both of them. So this is how it looks on the back. It's pressed towards the green fabric. Now, I wouldn't bring these two blocks together like this. I would want the colors to make kind of a 4-patch, making a 4-patch like this one over here. So when I bring these two together now, the seams are laying in opposite directions. And when you feel along the seams, they kind of just lock together like a puzzle piece. And in the quilting world, that's called nesting the seams. They're laying in opposite directions. You have a lot less bulk there. and it really makes nice, beautiful blocks. So if we brought them together like that, you'd see you have all these layers of fabric. There'd be 6 layers of fabric here, and you would feel the difference in how thick it is at that seam. And it would make it so much harder to press this when you would turn it. There would just be a big lump of fabric there. That is why nesting seams has become so important to me in my quilting journey. It has really helped me improve a lot of my piecing and quilting. My third tip for you is to make a test block. I have burned myself so many times by not testing a block in a pattern. I'll just jump right in, cut all of my fabric, get everything ready, and then I find out that something is a little bit off. I don't know. Let me know if that has ever happened to you with a pattern, but it can be so frustrating, especially if you have everything cut and maybe a size is wrong, or you realize that you didn't read ahead and it's a way you don't like to make flying geese, or a method for making half square triangles that you don't really love, and then you're locked in to make them all that way. Oh my goodness, that's happened to me before, because I have a very specific way that I like to make my half square triangles now and my flying geese. And in a pattern, you can usually adjust that if you make sure to read ahead and test a block, and you can make those adjustments. So along the way, I have definitely learned to make a test block first. I just grab some scrap fabrics, cut the things that I need for the pattern, and sew it together and make sure it works and everything is turning out the way I hope it will for the quilt. My fourth tip for you is to press your fabric, especially your seams and your blocks. Don't iron them. And I would see people talk about this when I first got into quilting. I would, be reading different quilt books that I had to find a pattern. This was before I was getting on YouTube and watching tutorials, but all of them said to press the seam, and I really never understood what that meant. I just thought it was, a fancier way to talk about using your iron. I really didn't know. And so I would just treat my fabric and my blocks the way I did when I would iron clothes. And I would, put a lot of pressure and press, and, of course, things can stretch out with fabric, and some of my stuff just wouldn't turn out right. And I didn't know why. I thought it was maybe because I was off with my sewing, different stuff like that, off with my cutting. I never really knew how important it was to lay your iron down on your seam and not put a lot of force and pressure like you're ironing. So that has helped me a lot when I finally understood that difference between pressing and ironing. My fifth tip is to place a pin on your blocks where you want points to meet. When I first started quilting, I never used pins. I just sort of lined my pieces up and would sew, and you still see me doing that a lot now. The only time I really pin is when I'm getting longer pieces together. But I do, especially when I'm sewing rows together or blocks, I will make sure to put pins in where I want points to meet so that I get nice points there, and it really helps define the block that I'm wanting to create. So we talked about nesting, and bring these two pieces together here, and I have them nested together. I can feel where they're joining together, and what I do is I will just pop a pin in to hold that together so that I know that those points are going to stay together as I sew. And that has also helped me so much with getting my quilts, my blocks, everything to turn out a lot nicer. So with my next tip, a lot of you who follow me a lot will probably give yourself a little chuckle, because it has to do with thread. And you probably know I rarely ever change my thread out. I'm always using the Orfil Dove Gray thread. But my sixth tip for you is that thread matters. And I don't think it's going to mean what you might be thinking it means with brand or quality. It's more the color of your thread. So here I have 2 pieces of black fabric that I sewed together with the thread that I almost always keep in my machine, the Dove Gray. And I feel like it actually blends pretty well with most colors. The only time I really change away from the Dove Gray is if I have a quilt with a lot of creams and I don't really like the way gray looks with the cream. I keep the thread in while I'm piecing the quilt, but when I quilt the quilt, I'll usually change to a cream thread because, like I said, I just don't like the way gray looks with cream. But here, if you're doing a quilt with a lot of dark fabric, the threads can end up showing through a lot. So if that'll bother you, just keep that in mind. The thread color can really matter even with piecing your quilt. You aren't going to necessarily see what color thread you are using to piece your quilt because it's going to get quilted together. But those seams can really show through sometimes, especially depending on your stitch length. So if this is going to bother you, you may want to think about changing out your thread to a darker color. And that honestly leads into my tip number 7. I have a thread cutter on my machine now, and that actually trims my threads for me pretty close, and I don't have a lot to trim away when I finish up a quilt. But I used to have long threads from piecing a block together, and I would always tell myself I'll trim those later. And one time I didn't. I was like, why do I spend all this time going through snipping all those threads after I get a top pieced together? Well, I quickly learned that it does actually matter. Those long threads can show up behind fabrics, and there's not much you can do about it after you quilt a quilt together and bind it and finish it. So let's take a look at what can happen. You used some black thread to piece together some of the black squares in your quilt, and you have some white or very light fabric in that quilt as well. Well, if you don't trim the threads and they're long and behind and just hanging out and you quilt it, you may see those threads behind the lighter fabric. And for me, I found it so frustrating. So if you don't want something like that to happen, just be sure to trim those threads. I try to keep trimming my threads as I work through the quilt instead of waiting till the very end and having to trim them all at once. But I definitely at least double check and make sure that there aren't loose threads like that. And I also try to make sure that some of the unraveling that can happen on the edge of fabric, I try to trim that down as well. All right, so my tip number 8 is to press to the dark side. I usually press my seams to one side. Every now and then I'll press seams open, but when I do press to the side, I try to always press to the darker fabric. And I'm going to show you why. All right, we're going to use these same 2 fabrics here, and if I press this seam toward the lighter fabric, I exaggerated it because I wanted to show you, but you can see the darker fabric back behind there. And it's almost like with those threads. It's just, if you quilted your quilt and have it all done, there's not really a way to fix that if you notice it later. It can be something that's really frustrating, especially if you put a lot of work into your quilt. So if you pressed it to the lighter side, you're gonna see that fabric behind there. Now, if they're trimmed to match really well, you know, that may not happen. But if you just press to the darker fabric, it just wouldn't be an issue at all. Now, if you do press open, the nice thing is that your lighter fabric's gonna lay on your lighter fabric side and your darker fabric's gonna lay on your darker fabric side. So that's just, it will be a non-issue with that if you press your seams open. I just don't prefer pressing open. I do if I have to. I do if a pattern indicates that makes it easier. I do if a lot of seams are coming together. So there are definitely times that I find that it's useful, but I much prefer just pressing to the darker side when I can. Tip number 9 is that you don't need all of the fancy tools that you see all the time when it comes to quilting. I recently put up a video showing the tools you'll need to make your first quilt. And in that video, I shared the bare basics. You honestly don't need a lot to make a quilt. A lot of the things that you see will make things maybe faster or easier, but they're not things that you necessarily need to make a quilt. Tip number 10 is that perfection does not exist. So go easy on yourself. If your quilt doesn't seem to be turning out absolutely perfect, just know that we're all human. It's probably not going to turn out perfect. I have yet to make a perfect quilt, and I've been quilting for years. What I try to remind myself is that I am making a quilt because I find it fun. I like to enjoy the entire process, and what really gets hard is when I don't feel like things are turning out the way I want it to. So I have to remind myself that I need to just enjoy the process. If things don't look like they're coming together perfectly, I need to remind myself that there's going to be a bigger picture in the end. When I get everything pieced together, when I get it quilted, those small little imperfections that I think are happening in a block or in a particular piece aren't going to be as noticeable when the whole quilt is looked at. Realizing that has really helped me enjoy quilting a lot more, because comparison can really be the thief of joy. I will see other people's quilts on, Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube even, and I'm like, wow, I have never made a quilt that looks that beautiful or that perfect. And I have to remind myself that, I'm seeing the big picture of that quilt. And I'm not saying other people's quilts aren't perfect, but I am saying that I'm sure there are small little details in that quilt that the person who made it wished had turned out better as well. So keep that in mind, please. I see a lot of people in my comments sometimes talking about how, they are new to quilting and they can't wait until their quilts turn out better or they improve different things in their quilting. And it honestly makes me feel bad as a creator, because I put up these videos and obviously I try to show mistakes that I've made and show how to fix it, but I also realize that the end quilt can look pretty perfect sometimes. Even sometimes I'm impressed when I'm editing a video and I'm showing the whole quilt hanging up and I'm like, wow, I did a good job. But when I'm close up to it, I see everything that kind of went wrong. But when it comes together, it looks really good a lot of the time. So just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of things that I wish I could do better in a lot of the quilts I make, and I know you probably feel the same way too, but we all need to remind ourselves that nothing that we make is ever going to turn out 100% perfect, and that's okay. Let me know a tip that you have learned along the way in your quilting journey that you feel has really helped you improve. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.